Client rights, due process, and responsibilities. During this presentation, we will review three authority sources for rights, limitations, and due process. Those authority sources are Missouri State Statute, Department of Mental Health, Division of Developmental Disabilities, Code of State Regulation, and the Code of Federal Regulation. As a Department of Mental Health contracted provider, TJ Swift House has processes to make sure an individual has the opportunity to learn and understand their rights, and that no one takes the rights away before they have a chance to speak for themselves or have someone they choose speak for them. This is guaranteed through due process procedures. Our first authority source that we will discuss is the Revised State Missouri Statute, Section 630.110, Consumer Rights and Limitations. Number 1 is to wear one's own clothes and to keep and use one's personal possessions. Number 2, to keep and be allowed to spend a reasonable sum of one's own money for canteen expenses and small purchases. Number 3, to communicate by sealed mail or otherwise with persons including agencies inside or outside of the facility. Number 4, to receive visitors of one's own choosing at reasonable times. Number 5, to have reasonable access to a telephone, both to make and receive confidential calls. Number 6, to have access to one's own mental and medical records. Number 7, to have opportunities for physical exercise and outdoor recreation. Number 8, to have reasonable, prompt access to current newspapers, magazines, and radio and television programming. This same code of regulation identifies rights that cannot nor will not be limited. Number 1, to humane care and treatment. Number 2, to the extent that the facilities, equipment, and personnel are available, to medical care and to treatment in accordance with the highest standards accepted in medical practice. Number 3, to safe and sanitary housing. Number 4, to not participate in non-therapeutic labor. Number 5, to attend or not attend religious services. Number 6, to receive prompt evaluation and care, treatment, habilitation, or rehabilitation about which the individual is informed insofar that person is capable of understanding. Number 7, to be treated with dignity as a human being. To continue on with the rights that cannot be limited. Number 8, to not be the subject of experimental research without prior written and informed consent, or that of a parent if the person is a minor or a guardian, except that no involuntary committed person shall be subject to experimental research, except as provided by statute. Number 9, to decide not to participate or to withdraw from any research at any time for any reason. Number 10, to have access to consultation with a private physician at the individual's expense. Number 11, to be evaluated, treated, or habilitated in the least restrictive environment. Number 12, to not be subjected to any hazardous treatment or surgical procedure unless the individual's parent, if the person is a minor, or guardian consents, or unless such treatment or surgical procedure is ordered by a court of competent jurisdiction. Number 13, in the case of hazardous treatment or irreversible surgical procedures, to have, upon request, an impartial review prior to implementation. except in case of emergency procedure required for the preservation of life. Number 14, to a nourishing, well-balanced, and varied diet. Number 15, to be free from verbal and physical abuse. The next authority source to review is 9 CSR 45-3.030, individual rights guaranteed to all individuals who are eligible for services from the Department of Mental Health, Division of Developmental Disabilities. Letter A, to be treated with respect and dignity as a human being. B, to have the same legal rights and responsibilities as any other citizen. C, to receive services regardless of race, creed, marital status, national origin, disability, religion, sexual orientation, gender, or age. D, to be free from physical, emotional, sexual, and verbal abuse and financial exploitation. E, to receive services and supports to achieve the maximum level of independence. F, to have access to all rules, policies, and procedures governing the operation of the Division of Developmental Disabilities in an accessible format, and to have those rules, policies, and procedures explained in a manner that's easily understood. G, within one's financial means, to have a choice where to live and whether or not to share a home with other people. H, to direct one's own person-centered planning process and to choose others to be included in that process. I, to participate fully in the community. J, to communicate in any form and to have privacy of communications. K, to accept or decline supports and services. L, to have freedom of choice among Division of Developmental Disabilities approved providers. M, to seek employment and work in competitive integrated settings. N, to participate or decline participation in any study or experiment. O, to choose where to go to church or place of worship or to refuse to go to a church or place of worship. P, to have rights, services, supports, and clinical records regarding services explained in a manner that is easily understood and in accessible format. Q, to have all of individuals' records maintained in a confidential manner. R, to report any violation of one's rights free from retaliation and without fear of retaliation. S, to be informed on how to make an inquiry, file a complaint, or report a violation of one's rights, and to be assisted in these processes if requested. You will notice that the Department of Mental Health Division of Developmental Disability rule is reflective of the state law previously reviewed. The main thing to remember is the people we serve have the same rights as anybody else. Now we're going to review the federal regulation, which is 42 CFR 441.301, Federal Rule, guaranteed to all individuals receiving services from the Division of Developmental Disabilities, funded through the home and community-based Medicaid waiver programs. Ensure an individual's rights of privacy, dignity, respect, and freedom from coercion and restraint. The personal plan will be understandable to the individual receiving services and supports, and the individuals important in supporting him or her. Individuals receive services in the community to the same degree of access as individuals not receiving Medicaid home and community-based services. Individuals have the right to privacy in their homes, such as locking their bathroom door or talking on the phone. Talk with family and friends privately. To seek employment and work in competitive integrated settings. And the setting in which the individual resides is chosen by that person. Continuing on with the Code of Federal Regulation, a person has the right to control their personal resources. They have the right to a setting that optimizes but does not regiment individual initiative, autonomy, and independence in making life choices, including but not limiting to daily activities, physical environment, and with whom they interact. They have the right to have a choice regarding services and supports and who provides them. Individuals have a choice of roommates. Individuals have the freedom and support to control their own schedules and activities and have access to food at any time. Individuals can have visitors of their choosing at any time. The setting is physically accessible to the individual. The Code of Federal Regulation is around choices. People with disabilities have the same rights to choose as anybody else. This means that they have the right to choose how to spend their personal spending allowance and wages, what they eat, how they spend their day, who they live with, where they live, having visitors, and communicating privately. If at any time you see routines that are limiting choice, please consult with your professional manager. There may be times when a person's rights may need to be limited for health and safety reasons. If that's the case, a due process will need to be implemented. We will discuss due process soon. Limitation of individual rights. T.J. Swifthouse believes that individuals who receive support should have the same rights and responsibilities as any other citizen. To avoid of limitation of rights, there should be ongoing conversation about how to modify environments, staff training, communication enhancements, and behavior modification training. Restricting rights should be the last resort. Some rights may be limited if determined inconsistent with the person's habilitation and safety of other T.J. Swifthouse individuals and/or the public. Due process and appeal process. In the event of an emergency, restrictions may be implemented immediately to ensure the safety for the individual, support staff, or the community. For example, if the person you are working with sits down in the middle of a busy road, to assure their safety, you may have to physically remove them. This may be a one-time event and may not need a due process. To assess the need if a restriction should be implemented as an ongoing basis, T.J. Swifthouse support staff need to be diligent about documenting the circumstances around the maladaptive behavior that places the individual or the public in danger. Restrictions shouldn't be implemented without the data to support the need. The professional manager shall present the habilitation team the data for the need. The request to restrict an individual's rights shall be discussed and agreed upon by the habilitation team, which shall include, but not limited to, the individual, the guardian, the support coordinator, an advocate, professional manager, team leader, support staff, and etc. If a restriction is implemented as an ongoing basis, a due process needs to be implemented. What is due process? Due process is the guaranteed opportunity to protest, to be heard, to be informed, and to give consent. The concept of due process is intended to protect people from exploitation of undue restrictions or rights. If a restriction is implemented due to an emergency and it's a single event, the right will be reinstated immediately. For example, going back to the person who sat down in the middle of the road. Sitting in the middle of the road isn't a right. Being drug out of the middle of the road is a restriction of freedom of movement. Once the person is safe, their freedom of movement is reinstated. Depending upon the scenario, this may or may not be a need for a restriction. If a restriction is implemented and data supports the need for ongoing implementation, designated staff will collaborate with the habilitation team to determine the due process. We've been talking about due process and the definition of due process. Now we're going to talk about the components of due process. The following are required to assure due process is in place. A justification. Why does this person need to be restricted of a specific right? What is the right that is being restricted? This is where data needs to be reported. It can be simple data, such as 3 out of 5 times Johnny tried to hurt himself with sharps. The restriction would be that he is going to be restricted of his personal possessions that may contain sharps. The conditions under which the restriction is applied. This would be where the restriction is going to take place. Is it at home? Is it in the community? Is it in the day program? Is it everywhere? The teaching or support strategies is what is the support staff going to do to help Johnny regain the right to his personal belongings? These could be teaching strategies or they could be support strategies. Support strategies is what the staff is going to do for Johnny. The teaching strategies is what is the staff going to help teach Johnny. There's a difference between the two. Monitoring methods is how often are we going to monitor this restriction? The criteria for restoration is a specific criteria of how the person is going to regain their rights. It could be in very small milestones or it could be in gigantic leaps. It all depends upon the person. The review schedule. How often is this restriction going to be reviewed by the team? Every restriction has to be reviewed by the Due Process Committee at the regional offices at least once a year. The team should be reviewing the rights restriction at least monthly. And lastly, the Notice of Right to Due Process. The person themselves need to be aware that they are being restricted. They are given 2 phone numbers, of which we will identify in the next slide, of external advocacy agencies. In case they are not in agreement with the restriction and the team feels that it's necessary to go ahead and implement the restriction for their safety, they are able to call the external advocacy agencies and report that their rights are being violated. Again, due process is supported by data. Data is comprised of the number of times a maladaptive behavior has occurred that jeopardize the safety of the person, the staff, or the community. Rights restrictions are time limited. However, it may take a very long time for a person to be able to get the right reinstated. Documentation should be able to justify why a person's restrictions continue to be in place. Progress through documentation should be noted on each shift and reported to the support coordinator on a monthly basis. Every person we support has a right to appeal the rights restriction that's implemented. TJ Swift House will assure the individual and guardian are aware of the limitation of rights. TJ Swift House will also assure information is presented to individuals so that they can appeal and express their disagreement to external advocates such as the Department of Mental Health Office of Constituent Services, 1-800-364-9687. Also, the Missouri Protection and Advocacy, 1-800-392-8667. Both of these phone numbers should be posted in each home as well as identified in each individualized support plan. There's a lot to learn about rights and due process. As you continue your career in this industry, you will become more familiar with rights and how to identify rights. Just remember, people with disabilities has the same rights as anybody else. There may be times when legal guardians or family members request a restriction to be implemented. Never argue with the legal guardian or the family member. Take the information to your team leader, your professional manager, or your director. To implement a restriction, data must be collected and a justification needs to be identified. Please review the list identified above that have been noted as restrictions. To identify if we are restricting a person, the bottom line is, are we taking away a person's decision-making ability, choices, or self-determination? If the answer to this is yes, we are probably restricting. Again, it may be necessary to implement restrictions for their safety or health needs. If that's the case, you'll need to assure a due process is in place. A due process identifying how the person will regain their ability to make choices and have freedoms. Please consult with your team leader, professional manager, or director to strategize on methods to prevent restrictions. Up to this point, we've been discussing consumer rights. Now we're going to shift gears and start talking about responsibilities. We've reviewed the rights that are entitled to people through the federal and state authority sources, rights that are entitled to everyone. What about responsibilities? It's extremely important to inform and educate people of their rights, but we also need to inform and educate people about their responsibilities. While people with disabilities have the same rights as everyone else, they have the same responsibilities as well. For example, people have the right to be free from verbal, physical, sexual abuse, and financial exploitation. They also have the responsibility to not impose violence, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, or financial exploitation upon others. People have the right to be treated with dignity and respect. They also have the responsibility to treat others with dignity and respect. People have the right to live in safe and sanitary housing. They have the responsibility to clean and maintain their homes. People have the right to make choices about their daily schedule. They have the responsibility to have meaningful days and make decisions about their daily schedules. People have the right to spend their personal spending money the way they want. They have the responsibility to save their money for items they want. People have the right to eat whatever and whenever they want, but they have the responsibility to assure their food lasts, being on a very limited budget. People have the right to not follow doctor-ordered diets, but they have the responsibility to listen to their doctors and try to improve their health condition to the extent of their limitation. Not everyone we support understands their responsibilities, nor has the capabilities of understanding their responsibilities. Because we are providing a service, we may have to do things for the people we support depending upon their limitations. Remember, we are providing habilitation services, which is a process of teaching a person to attain skills to reach the highest level of independence as possible. This will vary greatly depending upon the person. Supports must be individualized to match the person's needs. For more guidance, consult your team leader, professional manager, or your director.